it's a couple minutes after 4, so we'll go ahead and get started.
Yeah. Oh, that's so nice.
So we will go ahead and kick off with a roll call. And actually, Sarah, I don't think I have the...
Oh gosh, I printed out a new one for you. And then failed to put it in your
No,
spot.
that's okay.
Oh,
I was
gosh,
trying to...
This is on me.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So, Anderson, here. Buchanan,
Here.
Clayton,
Here.
Grimm, Harrelson here, Cruzy, no Cole either, Krylov,
Here.
Murray,
Here.
Peterson,
Here.
Shetty,
Here.
and Washington.
Here.
All right. And then next up, the minutes from not last month, but June, our last meeting. Does anybody have any corrections or comments or anything on the meeting or on the minutes from last time? Okay, seeing none, can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right,
Clayton, second.
thank you. And all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Right.
And it's approved. Okay. So then on to announcements and reports. And the first one is to welcome our newest member, Naisha Washington. Yes,
Welcome.
welcome. Glad to have you with us. Give you just a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and why you're here, why you're passionate about climate.
Yeah, I'm Naisha. I'm from the Iowa City area. I've gone to elementary through high school. The last 5 years I lived in Vail, Colorado, but my family still lives here, so I came back in 2025 to be with family, and my mom owns a small business, so I was kind of helping her with that. I met Sarah, last month, and I kind of expressed to her, I have a partner who lives in Cedar Rapids, and I worked with the non-for-profit a bit, planting trees, and I kind of got to understand a little bit about how they do their environmental policies and things. And safe to say I wasn't impressed, I guess, and it kind of stirred a little bit in my brain and what I was thinking, why are the things the way they are, essentially. And I started looking into city council meetings here and the boards that are what they do here and their policies here, and so kind of all encompassing. I just was interested, really. And then I met Sarah, and she gave me the climate action plan, and I was kind of reading over that and understanding what Iowa City does. And I mean, I think everything is great. I think that we are, I don't want to ever compare, but compared to Cedar Rapids, miles ahead, very much so. And I just wanted to be a part of it and kind of understand more, really. So, yeah, that's awesome. Why I'm here. It's
great.
Yeah.
Welcome. Well, we always strive to be leaders and set examples, right?
Yeah, they've got some work. It looks great, but comparing trees and the things that are going on ecology-wise here, just a bit different.
Fair.
Just a bit different, yeah.
Well, great. Glad to have you. I'll give everybody else a chance to introduce ourselves as well, just for your benefit. But we do kind of have a packed agenda for this week, so we'll just try to keep it to the 30-second version. I'll go first. My name is Zach Harrelson. Similar story in terms of, having been here for a while. I went to grad school here, met my now husband here, and then we went away for a few years for my first job to California, and I was involved in energy research there, and then came back, and so wanted to continue sort of my climate action and got involved through the climate ambassadors to start with. Also met Sarah through that, and some of the other staff as well, and then just kind of taking steps into more involvement and joined the commission after that. So.
I'm Mike Anderson. I came to environmental consciousness, I guess, through journalism. I was a journalist for many years. I interviewed activists. I went to Standing Rock and so on. It was kind of a life-changing experience for me. And I continued to smuggle in sustainability research and writings into my freelance writing job for Milwaukee Tool. for many years until I stopped doing that. And yeah, similar story to I think everyone here. Just wanted to get involved in the community and learn more about what the team is doing. So.
I'm Brenda, and I've lived in Iowa City since 2013. And I started at the Office of Sustainability and the Environment at the university about 4 years ago. And 3 years ago, I started on the commission as the representative from the University of Iowa. I'll just leave it there for now. Always like to work with the city. Learn something every time I come.
Yeah.
John Clayton, retired school teacher, served in the Peace Corps. My parents were avid climate action environmentalists as farmers. And that's where I initially got my concern about the environment from. And I also served as a soil and water commissioner in Poweshiek County. I am a farmer, and my land is in Poweshiek County, but I love Iowa City and I live here.
Cool to hear all this again. I'm Nadia Krylov, and I've been involved in this since the 70s, seeing things go front and back, forward and back, forward and back. And on the last back that I witnessed, which is the last election, I decided to go forward and to join the commission to find a way of participating. And I think you understand what I mean by forward and back and forward and back. So that's me for now. And I'm in my second year, if I remember, a year and a half now, so.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm from North Central Iowa, but also defected to Colorado for a while. I was there for 12 years after grad school. I got my master's in architecture there. And I've kind of always worked in sustainable building design and construction related fields. We've been in Iowa City now for 4 years, and I've been working remotely for the U.S. Green Building Council on their K-12 school programs. And I've been on the commission. This is my first year here, so welcome.
Hi, I'm Wim Murray. I have been in Iowa City for almost 30 years now. I was just calculating that. And I joined 3 years ago as the Mid-American Energy representative, as I did not mean to, but yes, I did for just in case you forget.
That's good.
Yeah, so I'm here as the Mid-American rep.
Thanks.
I'm Catherine Peterson. I've lived in Iowa City for 4 years, and I started the commission in January. I work at the University of Iowa Libraries as a cataloger, and I don't really have a formal background in climate action, but it's always been an interest of mine, and like everyone else, I just wanted to get more involved.
And I'm realizing that also during roll call, I forgot to ask the staff to, say who they are as well. So this is a decent opportunity.
Yeah, Sarah Gardner present.
Great. Well, yes, happy to have everyone here. Yeah. So we will just keep on trucking because, like I said, we do have a lot of things to get through today, a lot of good information. Although, actually, now I'm recalling that there's less going on than what's in here after all. So we will keep on going and we can come back to things if we need to at the end if we have time. All right, so reviewing action items from last meeting.
So there were 3 action items recorded in the minutes. One was to share more information about any anticipated changes to TIF funding. I don't yet know what those anticipated changes will be for the city, but I can provide a little context. When the state legislature passed their most recent property tax reform, in a nutshell, what it did was limit property tax growth within municipalities to 2% annually plus any new valuation. So if there is, for all existing properties, we can only increase the property tax levy by 2%, which you can imagine is difficult to keep up with inflation in the current context. In addition to that, any new construction that's built we would be able to charge the full value of that, the full taxable value of that new construction. How this potentially impacts TIF is, and for Naisha, just a little context, TIF is tax increment financing, which is an incentive that is used sometimes by cities, and we have actually been using it to fund some climate action efforts. I can go into more of an explanation later, but it basically zeroes out taxable value and then kind of reroutes any new growth. Zeroes out's not accurate, actually. It kind of sets a ceiling to the growth and then diverts some tax funds back to the organization, essentially. How it impacts TIF is that any new construction that goes in that is given a TIF incentive, you are not allowed to charge the 100% taxable value that you ordinarily would be. You are only allowed to charge the 2% growth after the TIF expires. So as an example, if you have some new construction on the edge of town, let's say in this case it's a commercial entity, because that's what we apply TIF funding to, that's built and it has $500,000 worth of taxable value. And then at the end of the TIF period, it has increased in value by 2% year over year. You have no access to the original $500,000 worth of value. You only get the 2% put on top, which, as you imagine, has some big implications for cities. We don't know, and I can't say exactly how Iowa City is going to approach this going forward, but I can certainly will keep you posted. But I can say, as you might imagine, a lot of cities are reconsidering their TIF policy because, you know, you want to be able to get that full taxable value if possible. Yeah.
Okay.
It leaves a lot of money on the table, you know, that then ultimately impacts your ability to provide basic infrastructure and maintenance and all those important things and climate efforts. So that's the update. We will give you more as it comes forward. I don't know that we have a set policy in place about it yet.
Okay.
The next request was for updates on the development proposed under the new form-based code. There really aren't any developments so far. Once the rezoning went through, now the process begins of actually working on that construction. I anticipate we probably will have an update sometime next year. But if something happens more quickly than that, we'll let you know. And then the final one is a description of how the Housing Fellowship determines the tenant for the student-built home, which is a little complicated, so I have to refer to my own notes on this. But in a nutshell, households are based to homes based on the size of the family and the income. The homes owned by the Housing Fellowship range from 1-bedroom apartments to 6-bedroom homes. And so they want to match them. You know, you don't want to put a family of 6 in a 1-bedroom or one person in a 6-bedroom. So they think about the size of the family. And they also think about, and this was very interesting to me, based on who is funding different properties, there are different income caps. And so there is a bit of a matching of the income with the property in question. Long story short, the applications are processed in the order that they are received with care, and this part I gotta quote Simon so I don't get it wrong, with care to treat each the same and not make assumptions about the applicant's preferences. So they basically go through and when they have a property available, like the student-built house, they go and look at the received applications that have been approved, and the one that the oldest application that fits the size and income requirements of that specific property is how it goes in. He said he would be able to provide a little more detail should we want to go further in the weeds, and I'm happy to bring him in, but hopefully that gives us enough to get our arms around how people land where they do. Cool. All right. And this will be recorded, so he will let me know if I got that wrong. All right, so the next item then is a correction to a discussion item from the last meeting. In June, as you were discussing the updates to the buildings action items, there was a question that came up about different models being explored for the solar system at the wastewater facility, and it was suggested that the different models we were looking at was solar array versus battery storage. In fact, what was being explored, and I just wanted to be clear on this, is different funding models, looking at something like a power purchase agreement versus the city owning it outright. That facility is not a great candidate for battery storage for a couple of reasons, but we wanted to make sure we were all clear on that. Cool. Staffing update. Some of you know this already from the beginning of the meeting. Our engagement specialist has let us know that she is leaving Iowa City, although with great regret, and we are very sad to see her go. So we are hoping to refill that position in the months ahead, and we will keep you posted on that. In the meantime, I just want to ask for a little patience in advance for all of us, because we are down a person and covering a lot of bases, and it comes at the same time that our AmeriCorps team completes their terms of service. So if you see us out in the community with our hair on fire, you know why. Upcoming events. This weekend, we will have a cooling station. It's our last cooling station of the season at Riverfront Rhythms in Riverfront Crossings Park from 7 to 9 p.m. We are also going to be having our solar trailer out and about. It's going to the NCJC End of Summer Jam on August 22nd at Willow Creek Park. The solar panels and batteries in that trailer are being used to power the DJ stand, which maybe is the most exciting use we've had for it to date. And then after that, we'll be taking it over to the Student Build project for this coming year so that they can use it to power their tools on site. So we're all very excited about that partnership as well. And we will have it at Climate Fest at the EV Car Show. We're combining the EV Car Show with a bit of a solar celebration. We're going to have the trailer there to show it off. As those of you who sat on the committee for climate action grants are aware, we also awarded a small grant to Kindred Coffee, who purchased a solar-powered coffee roaster. And they're going to be down at the celebration handing out samples of their solar roasted beans and being next to the solar trailer. So there's a chance for you to see it there as well. As to Climate Fest, the official dates have been set for September 22nd to September 26th. We have a really interesting slate of events coming together, including a panel discussion that's going to be hosted at the Engler in their cafe space on the second floor. We're going to be screening a movie, which I want to give credit to Diane, had the idea to have the movie live scored. So we're going to have a musician performing alongside of it at the library. We have the EV Car Show, as you know. We are partnering with the University of Iowa to celebrate their designation as a bee-friendly campus and our designation as a bird-friendly city for a little walk we are cheaply calling the Birds and Bees Walk. And what's the event I'm forgetting, Diane?
The gleaning event?
Oh, yes. And we're going to have a gleaning event at Shattuck Green Park in partnership with Table to Table as a way to highlight the expansion of the compost facility, which is the big accomplishment we're celebrating this year. So, in years past, we have invited commission members to be present for some of those events just to introduce themselves and talk briefly about the commission and then introduce the event itself. We are getting together a list of the events where that makes the most sense, and I will be reaching out by email to see if any of you would care to volunteer at one of the events to help give that introduction. So keep your eyes out for that email. Here's where I take a sip of tea and catch my breath and ask if any of you have events out in the community you would like the other commission members to be aware of.
Well, what movie is being shown?
Do you know called Planet Soil?
That's why. There's a live score. Like an orchestra?
A guitarist.
Okay.
I got this in my inbox on Sunday. The arts and crafts pop-up happening at Eastside, August 21st to the 22nd. It's you can donate your craft materials that you're no longer using. I think it's Wednesday and Thursday, and then Friday and Saturday is when you can come and get new craft materials. And it's also for school supplies too.
We had incredible amounts of crafting materials donated last year, and lots of people who were there picking up materials saying they were excited to come back and bring stuff next year. So if you are a crafter or have crafters in the family, it might be a good event.
And they're looking for volunteers. I'll be there Friday night.
Cool. Any other events? Awesome. All right. And then the last one I'll touch on lightly because we put the press release in your packet, so hopefully you're all aware of this. The Grow Solar campaign hit its first benchmark, which means everybody participating in it will now get a rebate check at the end of the program for the first level discount, which came at crossing the threshold of, I think, 51 kilowatts of solar capacity contracted through the program. We're actually, the most recent update is now at 108 contracted kilowatts. The next price break comes at 150. There are, if you've attended any of the Grow Solar events or have been following along, there's some fairly compelling reasons for homeowners to think about going solar this year. The biggest one being that next year the net metering rates will be renegotiated and are likely not to be as favorable to owners of, well, just not to repay at quite the same rate, which will increase the payback period for homeowners who are getting solar. If you're a business, the tax credits are still in place for businesses, so there's also a compelling reason there for businesses. All of that, of course, changes next year. So if you know anyone who's interested in solar, please do be sharing the program with them. We have about 6 more weeks to get people signed up. Nadia, did you have a question?
Yes, Krylov asking, do you have any idea of the breakdown of what kinds of units signed up for this? Single-family homes, multifamily buildings, townhouses,
Right now,
businesses, any idea of how that breaks down?
yeah. And I think I've talked about this in a previous program. One of the reasons we love this program first and foremost because it helps increase the affordability of solar for residents and businesses in our community, but we also love it because it collects really great data. Most of the homes have been single-family homes participating, but there are also some farms that have signed up for ground mount arrays and some businesses that have been contracting for it. And I actually am quite pleased to say the Housing Fellowship is getting solar panels for the student build house through the program, which is really great because it will help that home achieve net zero emissions while also lowering the cost of solar for everybody else who's participating in the community. So there's a nice win-win there.
Thanks.
The other thing you'll note on the announcements is, of course, we've been trying to think very comprehensively about this program. One of the, and I think I talked about this in a previous meeting, one of the bits of feedback we've gotten in the past is from homeowners who are concerned that they will not realize the full payback of their investment in it before they move from the home. There's actually pretty good data out there to show that whatever solar you add adds to the value of your home. There's data from Zillow suggesting it's somewhere between 6 and 9% of the value. There's also data suggesting that it really is the value of the solar array itself. So if you pay $15,000 for a solar array, the value of your home increases by $15,000. Either way, as a way to try to address this particular concern, we of course have been working on realtor engagement. And we do have a trainer coming in. It's the same trainer who's done this for us in the past, looking at how to engage realtors with energy efficiency. She's going to come in for a specific training with one realty office that has asked for it. And then also through ICAR and our partnership there, she'll be offering it for all Iowa City realtors to get trained on how to properly market a home that has solar on it. And that training will be taking place on August 27th. Fun stuff.
Yeah, great. Thank you for all those updates, Sarah. So now we are on into new business and okay, so you might have to help me with this one because I saw the email in my inbox and kind of read the preview, but I did not have a chance to read the full thing. But we were planning to have an update on the CPRG, which is sort of the regional climate planning effort that has been done over the past couple of years with all these different counties. I believe Alicia had to push off for this month. Is that right?
Yeah, she had some sick kiddos at home and was unable to come today. So we're going to reschedule her presentation. Just for the benefit of folks who weren't here when CPRG kicked off, this is the climate pollution reduction grant funding that was received by the cities of Iowa City and Cedar Rapids. We agreed to partner together on the development of a regional plan, and ECOG was contracted to do that work for us. They in turn expanded it to the entire 6-county region that they serve, which is also incidentally why Grow Solar now is serving that same 6-county region, because one of the things that we expressed was really important to us is that it not just be a plan that sit on the shelf, but we really think about what are offerings we could be bringing to the region to help make good on items in the plan. Alicia was going to come today to talk a little about the greenhouse gas calculations that were done for that plan. You may have noticed if you looked through the packet, some of the graphs. This, I think, is not going to make you feel any better about Cedar Rapids, Naisha, to see that Lynn has pretty high emissions. In fairness to them, they're a much more heavily industrialized community.
Yes.
And so there are some unique challenges there. One of the slides that is of particular interest to me, and I think to all of you, is there is a slide that talks about how once the pathway was established, there are emissions reductions were calculated based on, so like if we had a goal of increasing solar by X number of kilowatts or megawatts throughout the region, how much could we expect that to draw it down? And there are a couple different scenarios explored. One was with a complete greening of the grid and these additional efforts. One was just with the additional efforts. I do want to be very clear that the process used for this used a slightly different calculation method than the one we use for the city's calculations. And when Alicia's here, we can go into a little what those differences are. Part of them is just a difference in how the estimates are made for the protocol. They used what's known as a ClearPath protocol. We use what's known as GPC. The longer you're in climate, the more you realize all of these things are different estimates with different trade-offs, right? So it's difficult to say which is more accurate than the other, but ours are pretty accurate. And they don't differ hugely. The other thing that's included in their greenhouse gas estimates, they include ag inputs to some degree, and we don't calculate that because we don't have that really happening in the city much. But it is interesting to me to see the calculations based on what reductions could be achieved realistically throughout the region based on the pathway items themselves, because that is a calculation that was not done for our climate action plan. The contractor that was engaged with it did not have that capability. And so there are things, this question's come up in the past in commission discussions, like how did we arrive at a call for 50% reduction in car trips? And basically it was arrived at following a similar process to what was used in the CPRG planning process, which was talking to the community about what actions wanted to be seen, talking to stakeholders about what might be realistic, looking, for example, at how much could we increase bus ridership without having to buy new buses, trade-offs like that. And that's how we arrived at that number. But it was not necessarily grounded in how to fully get to net zero. And so one thing I think would be worth the commission considering as we think ahead to the next climate action plan is, would we like to have that kind of calculation done? Do we think it's helpful? Are there different ways we would enact our programming if we have those kinds of calculations? So good news, you get a whole month to think about it before Alicia comes and we can ask more questions. But I at least wanted to provide that gloss for you so you could be thinking about it between now and then.
And for that idea, would you be replacing like the method that you're using now to use theirs, or adding to it?
That's a great question. I presumably, and we would have to do some research on this, we would be able to keep the same method. We would just have to see if there's a way to calculate those reductions within it.
Yeah.
I think that there would be. It's actually, it's a very great question.
Yeah.
And
I was wondering.
yeah, we can look into it
maybe.
between now and then.
Yeah, when it's
Yeah.
decided.
And I know we've had many discussions over the years about the pros and cons of greenhouse gas inventories in general, and how sometimes the danger in a very detailed one is that it can turn climate action into a kind of technocratic exercise. Instead of just saying, does it reduce fossil fuel usage? Yes, then we should be doing it, right? So there's that trade-off. On the other hand, and we have talked about this as well as a commission, the word net in net zero does a lot of work, right? It recognizes that we are going to continue generating emissions into the future, and that in order to get to zero emissions, we need to have some form of carbon capture, which outside of planting trees is largely out of reach for a lot of cities. And so I think there's some very realistic and tough discussions that have to happen about what does that look like, or how do we think to that future between now and 2050. So on that level, those kinds of calculations could enable maybe a more frank conversation with the community about that. Nothing like, light topics to start your term on the commission.
Yeah, I enjoy it.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to get Alicia in here next month, and you all can ask more detailed questions. She'll also be talking to you about next steps for the plan.
Yeah, and in the meantime, we do have those slides already to start mulling over.
And if you'd like to read the report itself, the full plan, and not just the gloss that's in the slides, the full plan is available if you just Google Pathway to a Resilient Future ECOG. It'll come right up for you.
Great. Alrighty, so more to come on that. In the meantime, then, our main task for this week is reviewing items on the transportation section in our own climate action plan.
So just like buildings, or you did when you were reviewing the buildings section, I want to give you all 5 minutes just to glance over it. And then, it doesn't have to be exactly 5 minutes, but when you're ready, if you all would like to ask questions about any of the updates that are in there, I'm happy to provide more detail as I can. I could scroll down to that here too, sorry. I'm not doing a good job of keeping up on this. also open to the possibility that it's so well written, we just want to move on to the next item.
I do have a few. Do we want to start kind of in tier one? I don't. Looks like you've kind of scrolled through tier one. Has everybody had a chance to look at those? Any comments or questions in the tier one goals there? I think we've talked about the new subdivision or the rezoning of those acres before. Any other questions on that? The climate change analysis.
I guess I have one question for that. This is Anderson. Was this rezoning? Did this kind of spring from this push for climate change analysis? For like, did that? You know what I'm saying? Like, or was it kind of? Did it form kind of independent of that, and then it's kind of just a good example of what could come from the future? Or
I think so. My understanding is that the form-based code was originally initiated by then Mayor Throgmorton, and it was done out of climate concerns, and some other related benefits. The way all climate things have co-benefits, but it was a fairly new mechanism, and it's taken a while for our developers to get their arms around it and figure out, well, what does this mean, and how do we make this work? And that's why we haven't seen a rezoning until now. But the analysis was kind of baked into the form-based code, if that makes sense.
that makes sense.
And it was really based on, because this is a transportation item, like how do we create a kind of zoning mechanism that would support the reduction of car use within the neighborhood. That one's always a tricky item because we never have known exactly what has been meant by climate-based analysis for transportation. It's sort of lost in the development of the plan itself. But
I guess this is neither here nor there for the purpose of our discussion, but I'm just curious now, like, do you know if there's been other subdivision applications or whatever the term is that have had to go through an analysis?
I'm not aware of it. That doesn't mean that it hasn't happened, but I can find out.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Well, and I actually was thinking too, I mean, we placed this in, to your point about it being kind of nebulous too, we put it in tier one, though, despite it being a little bit nebulous. Do we have an idea of what it's going to look like going forward, or does there need to be more discussion around that?
There might need to be more discussion. I mean, a lot here, this sounds so legalese and it's not meant that way, but it's like, what exactly did we mean by analysis? You know, do we mean that we want actual numbers computed about what the emissions impacts are going to be?
Right.
We could,
like targets.
yeah, like we could do that a little bit because every zoning really does go through a transportation impact analysis that calculates like how many car trips are going to be generated from this neighborhood, and there's all that technical analysis happens within the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And if we know how many car trips are generated, then it's pretty easy for us to in turn generate, like, look at the VMT and generate what the emissions would be. and then do a kind of, the tricky bit is when a rezoning is brought to you, it's almost never like, here's scenario A, here's scenario B, here's scenario C. It's like a developer says, here's what we want to do, right? And so I guess for me, one of the questions is, do we want that formal analysis so we get a report and we say, yep, these are the numbers, and we don't really have any context or other options to compare them against? Or do we want something like a form-based code which just bakes in better practices? Like, do we want the analysis, or do we want the action, or do we want both? Or I think there's probably some rich discussion that could happen there.
Mm-hmm.
And I will also say, just to be clear, we can do the analysis. I guess the other question is, I don't know what kind of legal mechanism there is to enforce anything based on it. Like, I don't know that we can reject a zoning request based on this analysis that's done after it. Usually the way these things work, though, is developers come in to start the process, and there's like ongoing conversations with the city where we're like, here's what's allowable under the code, here's what we would really like to see. And you did see some of that in this development, like saying we would really like to see good walking access to the nearby park, and we would like to see the sensitive areas to the south of it protected. And there's that kind of ongoing horse trading, for lack of a better word. Nadia, did you have your hand up?
Yes, Krylov, still wondering about the 40,000 commuters who come here, and kind of they're invisible. Most of the focus is on little tiny trips within the city, yet there's this, I just see there's an opportunity to influence 40,000 commuters plus all the people who come in to games, and with something simpler than high-tech or EV. I brought this up before, I just want to bring it up again. Like the idea of giving information in some way, like even a card that goes with the tickets for coming to games, where you can find out about the sweet spot of your car model in terms of speed. What is its sweet spot? And it's always 10, 15 miles slower than people drive. So I would just love to see Iowa City take responsibility for being a regional center. And given there's an absolute dearth of regional transportation, there's no reason not to take responsibility in some way of influencing. The culture in rural areas is to floor it. And it's horrendous, and it's polluting, it's dangerous, and yet here we have this city that could do something more cheaply than one can imagine, to actually create a culture that says slow is cool, or sweet spot. Actually, it's more rational. It's not like woke. It's not woke. I'm totally woke. But it's non-woke to have it be smart, to drive the sweet spot of your car model. And this is what I have to say about transportation. Sorry, I just, want to recycle this idea. There's probably no possible response to what I just said.
Well, one response, and I'm not sure Brenda's going to thank me for it, is to say, those games fall outside the jurisdiction of the city. Like, talking about handing out information along with tickets probably would fall to the university. I don't know, Brenda, if you would like to look into that possibility or speak to it.
Yeah, I think that with tickets, people are coming in all kinds of different ways. They might even be here and not be driving a car. So I'm wondering if it could be more like parking areas, whether it's university parking lots or city parking lots or and always too. I mean, there's probably an education section somewhere here too, correct?
This could be an intern project, a volunteer, student thing.
Well, again, the students aren't driving mostly.
No, but
so
this would
how-
be something they could do to make a difference, on climate.
Mhm. Yeah, we'll have to talk offline.
Okay.
Because it can go in all kinds of different
Yeah.
directions, I think.
But
And-
the thing is, there's also the commuters, not just, there's Kinnick is just one great big mass of people that comes in. But there's also the daily commuters and how they drive and where they drive in from. Because that's the number that I remember is 40,000 commuters. Because we talked about that when we talked about having businesses set up charging stations to make it easier for people to buy electric cars. But what I heard was, what about the majority of the people who don't have EVs? What are we doing to affect that? And what would the difference be? What kind of calculation could a student perform to show if you took, like what the average speed is, what the cars are, and what difference it would make if people drove what the sweet spot the manufacturer says is the most efficient way to drive your car? What's the delta? Because that's the majority of the people, not the EVs. They're great and they should be supported, but there's a huge delta between reality and that for the moment. And I just hope we can do something. Okay, I'm done. Again.
It's a great idea to consider and jot down, and I think there certainly could fall under the transportation education and outreach campaigns, right? So I think that's something to note down and consider, and especially with gas prices.
Yes, that too.
Maybe now the iron is hot.
The sweet spot is
right.
now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So,
And the state has also raised the speed limit in rural areas by 5 miles per hour
Right.
in the last legislative
Yep.
session.
And why are they doing that? It just,
If you could get the Iowa DOT on board, kind of how they do those death seat belts, those signs.
Right.
If you could do something like that to say, hey, slow down, save the planet.
and also a website
That's a good
that where
Yeah.
you can get the sweet spot of your car and model.
Yeah.
Something
So
that gathers,
people could-
just
yeah.
says, do you know what your sweet
Yeah.
spot is?
On the flip side, when I was going to St. Louis down the highway in Missouri, there's this attorney, road sign, and it says in bold letters, "Have a wreck, get a check." So
Exactly.
What does that mean?
it means, I guess, if I have a wreck going fast, well, I can
I could possibly
somebody
get
and-
money for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's opposite incentives,
Have a wreck.
unfortunately.
Okay, I give up. It's time to move to France.
well, I guess we can keep rolling through this at any rate, so we can pop down to tier 2. I
Can
didn't
I
hear
make
any
one
more.
comment
Oh,
about
yeah.
the subdivision and rezoning?
Yeah.
But that climate change analysis part of it, I feel like we're at a point now, since we do have the form-based code, that the analysis might be moving forward and taking data that we can gather from what happens with that neighborhood. And then it would be more of a possibility of comparison to standard operating procedures right now with zoning, and creating a neighborhood that is form-based. So maybe it's not always analysis going into the zoning, but from now forward, and then seeing what happens next.
That's very interesting.
Do you mean sorry, do you mean like using that neighborhood as kind of the benchmark
Sure.
for like an analysis? Like you kind of have to meet these targets that this neighborhood is.
Right.
That's
And we should be able to get data from the MPO. That would make that easier moving forward.
Yeah, at the very least, I can ask the MPO what the plans are to gather that data and what the possibilities are.
MCO stands for.
The Municipal Planning Organization, they get all of the traffic data.
Whoops, metropolitan.
Sorry, Metropolitan. What did I say?
Municipal.
Yeah.
It's metropolitan because it serves the whole metro area and not just Iowa City.
Got it?
It's the university too, so they get the data there.
Yeah, it was just an acronym, so that's somewhere in there.
I was also kind of thinking, I mean, when those conversations are happening leading up with the developer, knowing that an analysis will be performed can be part of the incentive during that conversation as well, of like, well, we're going to be doing this analysis, so you want to make sure it's not terrible,
and that it's based
even
on,
if there's not really anything that maybe comes out of it, like.
You want to send a letter out to the HOA telling everybody not to drive on this day.
Yeah.
and that it's based on something concrete that already exists, I think is a good idea. Not like just some abstract thing on the internet or something.
Excellent thoughts. Thank you all.
Well, if that needs to be more well-defined to do something meaningful, certainly we can put that on a future agenda as well to discuss what that looks like or means.
And I think that would be important because it is tier 1, and
Right.
we know built environment is very important to
Right.
all things
I
climate.
might have to go back to that meeting and watch that video of like
What
to
were we
figure
thinking?
out what was I thinking. Why did we put that? I don't know what my notes are.
Especially since there's an open question of like what to do next, even.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay.
And certainly it's helpful to think about as we think ahead to an updated climate action plan. I mean, in reality, this neighborhood probably will not be built out until, we have a new climate action plan, but to be keeping an eye on that in the future is very helpful.
Sure.
Any questions about tier 2 items?
Does it go on to the next page?
It does.
I did have one here on TI1, incentivized public transit options. Fare-free service extended, that's great. 8 new paratransit buses, okay, good. Contract negotiations underway for 6 new hybrid buses to improve fleet reliability. I think last we heard we were looking at new electric buses. Is this a change there?
It is a change. Under the current administration, the no low emissions grant we heard literally the day we went to place the order for the buses that it will no longer support electric buses. Hybrids were deemed to be the next best option. The city remains committed to electric buses, but because we have to use this funding next for buses, the hybrids we're going to get next, and then we'll continue looking to the future.
Just curious.
I guess now is as good a time as any to say that the property tax reforms that are impacting city services will have a particularly outsized impact on transit. Our budget office is projecting, I think within the next 10 years, as much as a 50% shortfall because transit does not even get the 2% increase or evaluation. Well, they get the 2% increase. There's no way to get new valuation added to it. So
The hybrid buses like plug-in hybrids, or are they like the other kind of hybrid where
It's like
it's
regenerative.
yeah,
Or
my
they charge
understanding is that they are hybrid, like a Prius hybrid.
yeah, okay.
Not like a plug-in.
Okay, that was my question.
Yeah, no, it's a savvy question. Hopefully you notice that one of the ways we're trying to make lemonade out of lemons with these electric buses is that we actually did have a very successful experiment plugging in other vehicles into the fast chargers we have for the electric buses. So even though we don't have electric buses really in our near future, those DC fast chargers actually are still opening up some new possibilities for the rest of the fleet. So that at least is exciting and an important pivot. And one that I will say with some sense of pride originated in our office. Others hadn't thought of that possibility until we sort of pointed it out, because we track the energy usage data and we're like, why are we still paying for to power these DC fast chargers if we're not using them? And we thought, oh wait, what if we could use them? So some good outcomes there that flow from analysis.
I was curious also if there were plans to continue, like, are we going to buy more EVs anywhere else in the cities?
We are. We know that the fire department, for example, is interested in looking at EVs, particularly as they start talking about alternate response vehicles, which is a fancy way of saying, as we're thinking ahead to the budget constraints of the city, one idea that has kind of floated to the top early on is, do we need to send out a fire truck for every single incident? Could we be sending out smaller vehicles that, are also going to have lower emissions? And if we're sending out those smaller vehicles, could they be electric? So those are conversations we're all having.
It's Clayton, it's not made a lot of sense to me why, when we have an ambulance call at the apartment building, there's a fire truck that comes,
I have questions.
apparently to unlock the box that then will, so the door can be used by the ambulance. But that's a lot of money for these calls, and there's no fire.
Mm-hmm.
And they just sit there in the truck then after they do that. So I know Gurnell, this has been 10 or 20 years ago, said, when you make an emergency call, tell them whether you need the fire truck or not. And then, of course, you will get billed as well for that. So, yeah.
I'm sure we'll be having to come up with a lot of creative solutions going forward.
It's probably,
Oh, go ahead.
this is silly, probably not a priority, but merch for the buses would always be cool.
What
Just promoting Iowa City Transit, like t-shirts and stuff.
A cool idea.
Of course, that adds to global waste, but I don't know.
Right.
They did have, I don't know if they still have it, but they do have a small merch budget, and they were handing out lip balms for the different routes. And it was really interesting to stand at booths and see people dig through to find their route. I knew that I did it.
It's fun.
I think it was like Chicago Transit Authority had like a cool like merch situation at some point. I was like, I saw someone with a
They
t-shirt.
sold jackets at one point. I tried to get one.
They were pretty cool.
Yeah, they were. They are.
We could get ray gunned. Make some.
Yeah, they can do it probably.
There you go.
Any other tier 2 items?
Okay, I'll do one more then. Sorry. I saw the parking study completed. Do you have just like a one-liner highlight of?
It's done.
Okay.
My understanding is it is being presented tomorrow, actually, and then the request will come to alter parking minimums. What I heard from Ann Russett when I called up to ask if there were more details on this is that they anticipate at the very least reducing the parking minimums for multifamily housing in the city going forward. So there's at least one area that's been identified as a good candidate for less concrete in the parking lot, which I think is a good thing all around. And we can keep you updated as to what the other findings are as we know more about them.
Can you explain that? Less concrete, and then you're talking about families.
Yes.
What do you mean?
So, thank you for asking this question. When we talk about multifamily properties, we're talking about apartments and condominiums.
Okay.
in Iowa City, as in all cities for the most part, when you apply to build a new apartment or condo building, or you apply to do a significant renovation, there are ordinances on the books that say if you have, and I don't know the exact numbers, so big caveat here, these are not the exact numbers, but let's say you have 40 units, the law might say, well, then you need to provide 60 parking spots, you know, and there's some formula behind it that says, you know, basically, this is how many cars you could expect them to need. And the idea, I think, historically has been so that you're not pushing a lot of cars onto the street and causing difficulties for people there, right? Like the idea is, if you're building a large apartment or condo building, then you need to be accommodating the parking so it's not negatively impacting the surrounding neighborhood.
Yeah.
This study was conducted to say times have changed, driving patterns have changed, do these numbers still make sense? And some of the early findings for apartments and condos in particular said, yeah, you actually could get away with reducing your minimums and without expecting to see, you know, a whole lot of spillover effects in the surrounding neighborhood. And of course, as we know, reducing concrete can have some great knock-on climate effects, like reducing the heat island effect and helping with stormwater runoff and what have you. And it also reduces the costs, frankly, for those developers to put in that unit. And this part may be a little optimistic, but I suppose one hopes that what they're not spending on parking, they could be spending on higher efficiency appliances or solar panels. Or
No, right.
Corporations just think about profit.
But then, of course, the other side of it, sorry, just an add-on, what I've noticed is that the cars are getting bigger and bigger. And the trucks that come in regionally, that come in on the weekends and park, so are they less efficient? You know, you're saying there are fewer cars, but are the ones that are left more enormous? Is there any net advantage? I mean, they're bigger, they take up the space, and they're on the white lines.
They have a big vehicle, they probably have their own house. They probably aren't in a in an apartment building.
20 years old? Wait, you go through the townhouse, town crest.
Yeah. Okay.
So anyway, it just seems like the ramps haven't. They're free on the week. Let's see. They've increased to $2, but there's no premium on taking up a space and a half and endangering everybody else because they stick out. The trucks stick out. So
I don't know, honestly, if the parking study rose to that level of detail, but I can try to find out.
Do planners have a specific space size that's allotted? I wonder if that's gotten bigger and bigger too over the years.
Yeah, there are, I mean, it is regulated, a minimum stall size generally, and I don't know if that has changed or if there's discussion to change it. I don't know, but I can find out. And I think, I mean, it's not just anecdotal, the data is pretty clear that fewer and fewer sedans are being sold, and there's been a big market shift toward SUVs.
and their MPH is worse. So that makes controlling the speed even more important.
Nadia, you're a true ray of sunshine today.
So I'm
What's the analysis?
an elderly eccentric. That's my excuse.
We love it. They're important conversations.
So will this take an effect in zoning requirements? Is that how the analysis of transit? Are there zoning requirements for like bike parking, like providing bike racks or anything like that?
I think in the downtown area there is. I don't know the details of it, but I could find out.
Okay, just curious.
Boy, this is a short section, but you guys are bringing all the great questions.
Some of which are relevant.
They're all relevant.
The ride,
Sorry.
like ride sharing, that would probably, it's like why? We could also say it's decreased the need for, you know, like in areas where there's like younger people who probably maybe don't have a car, but they're using Lyft and Uber. Why would you need as many spots if people live there, but they just don't drive?
Also a pretty clear shift toward micromobility
Yeah.
helps. And also, to be honest, affordability can impact it too. You know, as vehicles get bigger, it's harder for households to afford more than one vehicle.
Yeah.
And there's a philosophical argument to be made too about whether and to what degree these developments should be accommodating guest parking, right? It's a delicate balance between providing parking for people who don't actually live there and, again, not wanting to, you know, spill over into the neighborhoods.
I was thinking that when you first said it, because when I lived in Colorado, I lived at an apartment that was massive, and I think every apartment got a guest spot, and then there was like a section of like bigger apartments, and they got 2 guest spots with like a carport.
That's a lot.
And it was large. It was a massive parking lot, like more parking lot than like greenery, I'd say. And yeah, when you said that they were maybe declining that number, I'm like, yeah, if you have a guest, it's like they park on the street then at that point. It's still kind of, I don't know, depending on where you are, it could be the same issue, or it could, you know, like you said, show that, yeah, maybe not as many cars are needed.
We need to kill the car. That's what we say.
And it doesn't count into the fact, like, how many cars are over 10 years old or 15 years, you know what I mean? Like, some people may have that car, but it's just, that's the car that they've held on to, and maybe not, like, like, there's 2 people in a household, but, you know, you have the same car you've had for the last 15 years. Yeah.
As long as it runs.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah, mine's 16 years old and it still does 37 mph because it's a tiny Ford Focus.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great.
So just taking a look at the clock, we've got about 20 minutes left. We do still have a conversation to get through with the next topic as well. So unless there's a one last burning question, really important. Okay. Maybe we'll move on to the next. Is that all right?
And I'll just say, of course, you're always welcome to reach out to staff by email if you find you have questions afterward. We're here to provide those answers for you. So the next item actually is a meaty item, and I expect, so that nobody feels any pressure to resolve all of this in the next 20 minutes, that it'll carry over into the next meeting. At your last meeting, you heard from NCJC, which is one of our Resilience Hub partners, about the completion of the first stage of their project of installing a generator out at their facility, and now they will be moving on to installing 2 others at their 2 other locations. When they do that, they will have concluded the first 3 years of the pilot program. The bike library is in a similar position. They have put in some energy efficiency measures and the solar panels on the rooftop. They are going to be putting in some energy efficient equipment in their kitchen to better accommodate community meals, and some additional shade structures and stormwater measures on their property, at which point they will have also completed the 3-year program, which then raises the question, what comes next? And this is a question that, given that Resilience Hubs really are a tentpole program for the community's climate efforts, we really feel that the commission should weigh in on. Hopefully you all had a chance to read the memo that was included in the packet. I'm not going to go too far into detail in the history of the project. That's largely in there for our newer members to be aware, but I'll just say that the program was originally configured as 3 years. The first year was a planning year. We bring in a facilitator who helps develop that plan. That facilitator has a specialty in Resilience Hub establishment. And then the year 2 and year 3, we have provided fairly large grants. It's a $50,000 grant in year 2 and then another in year 3 to then implement things that are in the plan. Now that we're exiting the pilot program, the question becomes, is this something we want to continue, and in what form? And in the memo, you'll see we have outlined 3 possible pathways forward. The first way would be to continue this program as originally designed. So we would continue to recruit new members or new Resilience Hub locations. We would continue to spend a year helping them develop a plan for their facility that could increase the resilience and their capacity to provide that resilience. And then we would follow on in years 2 and year 3 with $50,000 grants. If we do this, given the budget headwinds that we are facing, we would likely have to retire other programs that we work on. And in discussing this item ahead of the meeting with Zach, he asked for some context that might help with that. As an example, for the last several years running, we have funded climate action grants somewhere between $70,000 to $80,000. Following it becoming a tier 1 objective for the coming year, we actually funded it to $100,000. So one way to do this would be to reduce the number of climate action grants that are funded in the community. Or we could look at other grant programs that we have, like the insulation grants. I myself, in thinking about this, find it helpful to think about the resilience hubs there, the choice being, do we fund one big project, putting all our eggs in that basket, or do we continue to fund several smaller ones that are more dispersed throughout the community through the Climate Action Grant Program, or some hybrid in between? We could look at yes, we're going to continue to provide some funding. It's not going to be as much as we have in the past. I think a meaningful discussion for you all to have is a question about fairness to past and future partners, in that scenario and in all of these. The second pathway that we identified for going forward would be a revised model where we continue to provide the guidance with the facilitator to create a resilience hub plan, recognizing that that is a kind of specialized expertise that they might not have access to otherwise, and a strength of our division and our efforts to be able to provide that. And then once the plan is developed, we could, as part of that, have a fundraising component to it to help, just have a follow-on fundraising plan, and look for outside partners like the United Way, who has expressed an interest in funding activities of these sorts, to say, here's the plan. Let's now work with the United Way to bring in some outside funding to provide these activities. And you'll have noted, hopefully in the memo, that we did point out we had an opportunity in this last year, because of a unique grant opportunity that came up, to kind of try out this method with the Great Plains Action Society. And it seems so far to have worked well, in the sense that it was a very positive partnership. It did seem to provide some very meaningful support to an organization that itself actually already had some Resilience Hub ideas in mind, and we were able to help further refine them. I can't say that it has garnered more funding to date, but it's early days. There may be some, and there's a pretty good plan in place for what they might pursue in the next few years, so we can see how that plays out. And I should be clear, we're trying to start this conversation early. It will be several months yet before the projects are completed for either of these, so we've got some time to wrestle with it. The third option, of course, is to stand down the program for the time being and say, this was a really good project. It achieved a lot of success. We don't want to continue carrying it forward until we think we're in a position to be able to bring to bear the same resources again. I will say in that scenario, just, no one has a crystal ball, and God willing, the state legislature could change their mind on some of these reforms. But
Need you to say no.
Not for a while.
Jesus.
if we stand down the program, probably we're looking at standing it down for 10 years, until we get fully restored funding again, if then. So all important things to keep in mind. What we would really like to hear from you in today's discussion, and again next month, is some discussion of which of these pathways do we want to follow? And then assuming you would like to move it forward, there are some follow-on questions about what the application process should look like for future hubs. And so maybe we can hold back that second half and today just maybe focus a little on initial thoughts on pathways forward.
Yeah. Would you mind scrolling to the like
Yes,
three
sorry.
three options, and then we can kind of discuss.
So you mentioned a trade-off with the first option with regards to having to reduce grant funding to help continue the program. Is there a trade-off for the second model? Is there resources that would have to be sacrificed in order to continue providing the guidance?
Philosophically, I'll say in life there are always trade-offs, right? But I think in this case, I don't think it would necessarily be difficult for us to continue working, at least with the same facilitator. I think the cost of that to date has run about $7,500 per Resilience Hub, which is something I think we can maintain funding for.
Okay.
And I will say, for what it's worth, the Resilience Hubs that have participated in that project have found those discussions really meaningful. So much so, NCJC, when they completed their plan, actually asked if part of their implementation grant could be used to carve out funds so they could pay the facilitator to continue working with her for implementation. And I think what has been so good about that is, like, it's a really great, it's a kind of strategic planning process, but catered really to thinking about climate resilience, both what the resilience components are, what degree, in what ways are they contributing to resilience in the community? And in what ways can we increase that, right? Like, I think you've heard me say this before, we tell them in those conversations, we're not here to add to your mission necessarily. We're here to help support it, in an emergent situation. And I will say, one of the things that's been so gratifying to me about this program is both organizations have responded very positively to that message and then gone on to say, but we do want to take on some extra work. And that's what's made them a great partner. And I think a lot of that flows from that discernment process.
Question. During our last meeting, there was a conversation about the city addressing, or at least talking about, the reality of the number of over 90 or 95 degree days in the summer that we should expect. We're now into that summer, partway through it, and I think it would be great to address these questions against the background of the reality of that, what has happened, what is the expectation, where is the most critical need in the face of that particular indicator. The outright temperature, are there businesses suffering because they can't afford the energy costs, individual people, the equity, the issues, what you predicted has happened. So it's possible that should be in the background of this conversation, because that can tell us where the money should go and how. So is there a way of doing that? Is there a way of seeing what has happened and how those resources have been used, that they've been addressed, and where is the suffering now, financial or literal?
So I don't know if this entirely gets to what you're asking, but I can share that one of the outcomes of this Resilience Hub partnership with NCJC specifically was during that facilitation process, we brought in Johnson County Emergency Management Services and the emergency management portion of public health to be part of those conversations. And that has fostered some really lovely partnerships and continued conversations between them. One of which was the public health department ended up approaching NCJC to do an extreme heat scenario planning workshop. And NCJC, which had not previously engaged in this before, said, yes, absolutely, we want to do that. And so they brought in their staff, and volunteers, they participated in it. They now have concrete plans for how they would handle a high heat, scenario. And they were given a follow-on grant that public health was able to secure to help provide shade structures in their play area. So further addressing an item that was in the plan, and because they had that plan, they said, oh, here's something we don't have funding for that we'd like to do. It was successful enough, actually, that just last week I was in a conversation with public health. Coralville is interested in standing up a Resilience Hub program of their own, and they're looking at doing it at the library. And the Public Health Department and Emergency Management Services said, hey, let's do another one of these scenario workshops. And then reached out to us to see if we would like other organizations in the city to participate as a way of kind of helping line them up for some potential funding, but also just enriching the conversation. So I think there have been some very clear outcomes related to high heat in particular. The other one is NCJC now has a direct line of communication with emergency management for the county. And when they are looking to put together an event like the end of summer jam, they call in now and ask, what is the weather forecast for that? What do we need to be thinking about? And that is something that had not been happening in the past. So,
and all this is covered, could be continued to be covered if it just kept going the way it is. I mean,
well, I mean, I think those relationships are established for NCJC and will continue, as far as I can tell, for the foreseeable future.
And the funding could continue this way, the way it is now?
Funding from us or funding from?
Well, just whatever pot of money is being divided now for these things. You know, talking about grants. So against the background of what's going on, there are opportunities to say the grants are not for long-term climate change, but more for immediate, you need solar.
Well,
Do you see what I'm saying? Is there's against the background of that intensity.
The way I understood that, so we have given NCJC, maybe not fully yet, but we've committed all the funds that they're going to get as part of this process from the city or from the Climate Action Office. Because of the planning that they went through with us, they are now enabled to get funding from other entities such as public health, such as the possibilities are endless, right? So what I took from that is that planning is kind of the crucial part, because you get the strategy, you find where are your opportunities, where are your strengths, where are your weaknesses, and then that helps you formulate and see clearly, like, oh, well, we could apply to this, we could apply to that. These are the things we need, and then you can sort of build from there. And also that there is other funding out there, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, and this is all tracking. Thank you very much. Yes. And the memo touched on this lightly. Like, we anticipate continuing to provide support for both NCJC and the Bike Library in the form of convening quarterly meetings. They've both asked for that. They would like to remain active. And we will do that regardless of what is decided for continuing the program in terms of offering it to other entities. And that's really the question before us. Not are we going to continue to engage with NCJC and Bike Library, but are we going to invite something like Dream City to go through the planning process? Or yeah, we would invite a number of nonprofits potentially to apply, and then that gets to the next discussion. But
Yeah.
I think the discussion before us today is really, what way would we like, do we want to continue recruiting other Resilience Hub partners? And in recruiting them, what are we offering?
And with the knowledge that if we continued it the way we've been doing it, it would come at the cost of other programs.
Will there be like for me, since I'm a little bit newer, a reference of these results? Like whether they're positive or negative, like would I be able to be like, oh, okay, so NCJC was able to, create this result and continue funding. Would there be like a way we could see if it didn't go that well? Like if you use the money and, they were like, thanks, but no thanks, essentially. And continue.
Or if they ran off to Vegas?
Yeah, like, they used it and they were like, okay, that's
Right.
great, and we did it, but we don't really need, like, would there be a way to see the results, I guess?
Yes, one of the things we require with the implementation grants and with the planning grant is that we have asked them to come in and make a report themselves to the commission so that you can hear it directly. So when they had a plan, they came along with the facilitator and presented on the plan, said, here's the conversation we had, this is what we want to do. Then we voted to fund it. And at the end of the first $50,000 grant, they came and presented. This is why actually Rachel Rockwell was here at the last meeting to say, this is what we've done so far, this is how we're going to continue. She will come back at the end of that.
Is this like when we were at Day Drink and we saw the canopy? Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
That was a climate action grant.
Or separate?
separate.
Okay.
The
I'm
canopy was
imagining
funded
that
through-
in my head.
Yeah,
Okay.
climate action grants. And we do try to, for most of our grantees, bring them in so that you all hear from them directly.
Well, and one of the things in this middle one that stood out to me as well is the climate action grant could provide local matching funds. So even if we're going the middle route where we aren't providing a lump sum to a resilience hub, the climate action grant still provides an avenue to do that in smaller chunks or things like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and we could figure out what that looks like. It could either be that if a resilience hub, when you sign on to be a resilience hub and you go through the planning process, you get automatic bonus points in the climate action grant scoring.
Yeah.
Or we set aside a small pot of funds from climate action grants, knowing that a resilience hub may come to us saying, hey, we need a local match. Similar to what happened with Great Plains Action Society, they had this big grant they wanted to go after, but they needed a local municipal partner to say, we'll sign on. And we could say, in these grant opportunities, we will commit to signing on as your municipal partner. A lot of these bigger grants, don't even necessarily require a local match from the municipal partner. What they want is a municipal partner who can do the accounting to make sure there's no fraud. Because smaller nonprofits just may not have the ability to have that robust. So we can act as a pass-through to the resilience hubs. And I think the middle path certainly leaves open the possibility for doing all those sorts of things. Mm-hmm.
If this is, fun, but so if they do skip off with the money, but the city has signed off, then we are responsible for paying back the grant.
If we were the municipal partner in a larger federal grant. That depends on the grant and the agreement. I will say most of these grants are actually reimbursement grants. So the organization has to put up the money first and then get paid back, which helps control for that.
Yeah.
But what we would do is, as a municipal partners, have our eyes on that and be like, yeah, they really did get solar panels instead of a suspicious fleet of Mercedes-Benz.
Yeah, the Pikes Library. We know where they live, I guess.
These days, you
Breaks.
don't know. Something could be going on, especially in DC or somewhere. Sorry about that. I was just kind of flight of idea.
That's good.
Go ahead.
No. I was just noticing the time as well, but
I was as well. I think this is probably a good place to leave the conversation and give you a month to think about which of these pathways feel right and other questions you might have about them. And of course, feel free to reach out in the intervening time by email.
Yeah.
And we'll take it back
that
up next
sounds
month.
good. Okay, well, thank you everybody for a great conversation today. I don't see any members of the public, so no need for comment at that time. Any major recap items then?
The next meeting will be Monday, September 7th from 4 to 5:30 in this room. I did not write down all the actionable items, but I'm sure Diane did. So we'll report those out in the minutes. Yeah.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you very much. Can
Thank
I
you.
get a motion to adjourn?
Clayton motions to adjourn.
Second.
All right. And all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
At 30.
Thanks so much for the good discussion.